So here we have a subject, Black Swan Hunting. And I don't know if that term, Black Swans, is something you're familiar with or not. Maybe it's a mystery as to why we would talk about big black birds as part of a risk management webinar. But hopefully, if you're not familiar with the term, the idea will become very clear very soon. So let me start with talking about the future. There was a Danish physicist called Niels Bohr about 100 years ago, quite famous, and he said prediction is always difficult, especially about the future. That's a joke, of course. It's easy to predict the past because we can just look back at it, but the future is very difficult to predict. And predicting the future is something that we have to do regularly, particularly in the world of business and projects, because we're in an uncertain world and we have to deal with uncertainty wherever we find it, whether that be in our projects or in our personal lives or our professional lives or in the political sphere or our national environments. There's lots of uncertainty everywhere and we have to deal with it. But why is the future hard to predict? We can use this word danger as six letters to remind us of characteristics of the future which make it hard to predict. The first is that the future is dynamic. That means that it's not static, it's not still or stable, it's constantly moving and moving very fast. And so the dynamic nature of the future makes it very hard to predict, it makes it uncertain. Secondly, the future is ambiguous. That means that it's hard to understand. There are things about the future from our perspective today, as we look at them, we're not quite sure what they mean or how they're going to turn out. There are various options and we can't choose between them. So it's very hard to predict because the future is inherently ambiguous and not necessarily clearly understandable. The future is non-linear. What that means is that we can't take the past and what's happened in the past and just project it forwards into the future in a straight line and say that the way things have developed in the past is the way that they'll continue to develop into the future. If we look at the way that certain things have developed, maybe like the speed of travel around the world or the human population or the rate of change of the world's temperature in the world's seas or the discovery of new drugs, all sorts of different things, these things are non-linear. So we can plot the number of people with mobile phones in the world, and it starts off very, very small and there's a straight line, and then suddenly it goes crazy and everybody in the world seems to have at least one mobile phone. These things are not easy to predict because we don't know where they're going. We can't just predict forward from the past. Here's a word you might not know. It's made up of two separate words. The word is glocal, and it's a combination of global and local. And what we find is that there's a combination, if we look into the future, increasingly where things that happen on a global scale have implications locally. So we might find that there is an earthquake in China, which disrupts the supply chains for factories in England. And the other way around, we might find that there are things that happen locally in our locality, which have a global implication. Maybe the issue that happened with Facebook recently, which was to do with a company in Cambridge in England misusing or collecting data from Facebook users in a way that wasn't expected. And that's now having global implications for all Facebook users. So this idea that the global and the local are tightly connected in the future and will increasingly be so. Another thing about the future is that it is emergent. That means things arrive and surprise us. We can't just always expect what's going to happen. Things will emerge as the future unfolds. And so it's hard to predict what those emergent things will be because we can't see them coming. And lastly, as we think about characteristics of the future, increasingly the future is relational. It's about links between people, whether those are individuals or people in different communities, people across nations, people internationally. A lot of what's happening will be more and more to do with how people relate to one another, and not so much about big organizations and big societies and institutions. It'll be much more to do with individual relationships. And we can perhaps see this increasingly in the world of politics, where the relationships between presidents and world leaders increasingly is driving the future simply because of their individual relationships rather than the strategic partnerships between the nations. So the future has these characteristics: dynamic, ambiguous, non-linear, global, local, and emergent and relational. And that makes it very hard to predict. What I want to do in the rest of this seminar is to talk about one of these 6 characteristics, and that's the characteristic of emergence, things that surprise us when we don't have any idea where they're coming from. And a lot of risks share this characteristic. They're hard to predict in our projects and programs or in our organizations. Emergent risks have a number of other names. They're also known as unknowable unknowns. Now, you've probably heard about known unknowns, things where we are aware of our lack of understanding, and unknown unknowns, where we don't know, that we're not aware that there's something that we don't know. There's also, this is a little bit different, emergent risks are risks that we don't know that we're ignorant, but we cannot know that we're ignorant. They're unknowable because they are outside of our way of thinking. They're things that we can't conceive because they are completely beyond our current experience. Everything that we've learned, everything that we've seen up to this point has not prepared us for the things that emerge. And emergent risks are not just currently unknown, but they could not be known until they happen. So they are unknowable, which makes them very, very difficult, maybe impossible to predict. There's a technical word, we'll move over this quite quickly, but these type of risks are called ontological uncertainties. And ontological just means it's to do with origins, with where things come from. And so there's uncertainty in the source of this type of risk. We don't know where it comes from. And then we have another term that we use to describe emergent risks. And it's this term, Black Swans, which is in the title of our webinar today. And the title Black Swans comes from a book which was written by this man here, Nassim Nicholas Taleb, in 2007. And his book was called The Black Swan, The Impact of the Highly Improbable. And here he used this idea of a black swan to describe emergent risks, things which come at us without us seeing them coming, things that we are completely unprepared for because they were unknowable. And the reason he calls them black swans, this type of unknowable risk, is because of the history of a bird that we call the black swan. Let me give you a very quick history lesson. In Europe and the Americas, we knew for certain for hundreds of years that all swans were white. If you have a very large bird with a long neck and it lives on water and it flies and it has very big wings, it's a swan if it's white. And all swans are white, and all white big birds with long necks that fly are swans. And we knew this for sure. These were the characteristics of swans. And then in 1697, a Dutch explorer discovered Australia and was exploring in Australia and found birds that looked like swans. They were very big birds. They had long necks. They lived on water. They could fly with very big wings, but they were black. And so clearly they could not be swans because we know for a fact that all swans are white. And so they were given a completely different scientific name. They were not believed to be related to white swans in any way, until they started to bring some birds back to Europe to study. And when they studied these birds, they discovered that in fact they were identical to white swans, apart from the color of the feathers. And so the term black swan is for something which turns out to be true, that until we saw it, we could not believe, we couldn't even conceive that it was possible. So that's why we call these things black swans. And Taleb in his book said there are 3 characteristics, 3 ways of testing if something is a black swan or not. First of all, it's unexpected and unpredictable. So that means it's an unknowable unknown. And it's an outlier. It's not part of the normal data set. It's not something that we see in our usual day-to-day experience. It's something very unusual. and it's unpredictable because it's so very unusual. Secondly, when it happens, or if it happens, it has a very large impact. We really notice when a black swan arrives because it affects lots of things. And thirdly, once something has happened, we look at it and try and work out where it came from. And it seems to us that we could have predicted it, even though we didn't. So these are the three tests for a black swan: something which is unexpected and unpredictable, which is different and unusual, an outlier, something which is big, and something which afterwards we think we should have seen. In Taleb's book, actually, as well as talking about swans, he also talks about turkeys. And he plots a graph, which I'm going to reproduce here, about turkeys and their well-being, how healthy and happy turkeys are as time progresses. And it starts here at the 100% point. The turkeys, this is where they begin. They're quite happy and healthy. And then we have a timeline along the bottom, which lasts for about 3 years. And as time goes by here, turkeys, because they are fed well and watered well and looked after, gradually their well-being increases, and they get more and more and more happy, and they get bigger and more fatter, and everything looks really good until about 3 years in, and then suddenly there's a surprise, and their well-being goes from very, very good to very, very, very bad. In fact, they're dead. And what happens after 3 years to turkeys on the farm? When they start off here and the farmer looks after them and feeds them every day and gives them water and makes sure they have shelter and cares for their diseases and looks after them really well, and then after 3 years they die. And the answer is, in the Americas, Thanksgiving, and in other countries like yours and like mine, Christmas, where in Europe we eat turkeys to celebrate Christmas, and in Thanksgiving in America they also eat turkeys. So after 3 years of being on the farm, the turkey gets very surprised because he thought everything was wonderful, and then suddenly he got killed. And the idea here is that this is, if you follow the plot of well-being and you were a turkey, you would imagine things would go on like this forever, and you would always be looked after and cared for until you're not. So here are two turkeys discussing their future, and one of them says, if the farmer wanted us dead, why would he feed us so much? And the other guy says, you believe what you want to believe, I'm out of here. So that's another illustration of the sort of thing we're talking about. Let me give you some more examples of black swans that we've seen in the recent past. These come from inventions which change the way we do things which are completely different. Maybe the invention of a refrigerator, or the invention of the motor car, the invention of the mobile phone. These things have completely changed everything. Crossover technologies, where things that are invented in or common in one field suddenly find another use in another field. Or complete game changers, where something is done or discovered, or we start a different way of doing things, which completely breaks all the rules. And here are some examples. In 1982, the arrival of the internet, completely unexpected, completely unpredictable, changed everything. And now we can do things that we could never dream of doing before, in terms of talking to people on the other side of the world, instant access to lots and lots of information. The internet has changed everything, but nobody saw it coming. Now, in retrospect, as we look back, we can't imagine not having the internet, because it's just part of our daily lives. Until 1989, we knew for certain that there were two ways of organizing the world. There was capitalism and there was communism. And these two would always exist alongside each other, and they would always oppose each other and compete against each other. And then in 1989, there started to be unrest and revolutions in Eastern European countries, until in 1989, the Berlin Wall was torn down by the East Berliners. And suddenly communism collapsed, and the Warsaw Pact is no longer there, the USSR is no longer there, the Soviet Union. Everything changed, and now it's not true anymore that we have two equal and opposite ways of organizing the world. Whether that continues, we don't know. In 1996, the development of Google, and now we can find out anything about anything instantly. 2001, the first Islamic terrorist attack in New York, again, completely changed the way that we travel, the way that we think about other countries, the relationships between the Western world and the Arab world. So much changed as a result of that one unforeseen event. Twitter in 2006, the financial crisis in 2008. These sorts of things are have completely changed the world that we live in. And they were unforeseen, they were big, and when we look back on them, we think, well, I guess we should have seen them coming. Here are some more recent examples. In 2014, the change in the price of oil, which you will be very well aware of, where it went from perhaps over $100 per barrel down to 20 or so, completely unexpected and changed a lot of things. 2015 in Europe, the migrant crisis, people fleeing conflict in the Middle East and coming across to Europe in hundreds of thousands of people arriving in Italy and Greece, making their way through to Germany and Hungary and so on. Completely unexpected, the numbers, and completely changed a lot of things. Our vote here in the UK to leave the European Union in 2016, nobody thought we would do that, not even those of us who voted for it. And so it's one of those things that is changing everything, and we didn't see it coming. And of course, the election of the current President of the United States of America. What a surprise that was, and how that is continuing to change things. And what about Black Swan events looking forwards? Well, we don't know. We don't know how many there are. We don't know how many we might see. We don't know where they're coming from. There might be none this year. There might be 10 or 20. We'll have to wait and see, because they are unpredictable. They are unknowable. We can't see them until they arrive. What we're trying to do is to look for these things, and usually we look for bad things. But it is important to remember that not all of these Black Swan events are bad. The internet, for example, is generally seen as a force for good, something which has enabled us to educate our children, to learn about different things, different cultures and so on, very easily and right around the world. The fall of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of communism, maybe that's a good thing, maybe that's a bad thing. It depends on your perspective. Not all Black Swans are bad things, and we have to recognize that sometimes things that turn out to be very, very good were completely unexpected and unpredictable, and were big when they happened. And who knows, it might be that President Trump's visit to North Korea very shortly might turn out to be one of those things. It might turn out to be a very, very good thing, which changes everything, and nobody thought it was possible. Well, we'll wait and see, won't we? So some of these Black Swans are bad things, and some of them are good things. What we're trying to do is to find them before they find us. And how are we going to do that? We've said that Black Swans are unknowable. If we can't know them, if they are outside of our current term of reference, does that mean that we can't manage them? If we can't even imagine what they might be, how on earth can we manage Black Swans? Well, we can't manage individual Black Swans because we can't see them coming, but maybe we can do something around where they come from or what their effects might be. So Black Swans, it turns out that there are a number of common triggers or global causes of Black Swans. If we analyze the Black Swans that we've already seen, then we can spot a number of trends, a number of factors which give rise to the Black Swans that we've already seen, and which might be the sorts of things we should monitor when we're looking for Black Swans in future. And Black Swans that have actually happened have effects that we can feel and see in our own projects and organizations and communities and countries. And so what we can do perhaps is to predict the global causes and see them coming, predict this side, and protect against the local effects. Can we predict global causes and protect the local effects of Black Swans, even if we don't know what they are themselves? Let's think about that a little bit more. In terms of global causes then, can we predict where Black Swans might be coming from? The International Risk Governance Council has done some work on emergent risks and looked for the causes or triggers of black swan risks, of emergent risks. And in their research, they published a very good report on this. They identify 12 factors which give rise to most of the black swans that we've seen. And they've written this up in this report, The Emergence of Risks, Contributing Factors. And it's quite a short report, about 20 pages, and maybe one and a half pages on each of these factors. So it's very easy to read and easy to understand. And what they're suggesting is that these are the sorts of things that we should be monitoring looking into the future, so that we can spot whether something is beginning to happen in these areas that might give rise to an unexpected event that has a big effect. So we might think about new discoveries in the world of science, this first one. Are there going to be new discoveries that will be really helpful? Like, for example, thinking about the human genome, the ability to identify all of the characteristics of the human chromosomes so that we can understand where people are vulnerable to diseases, maybe to cancers, and then we can design specific genetic treatments for individuals to protect them from those diseases. That was previously completely unknown that we could do that kind of thing, and now it's become a real possibility. Or maybe there'll be negative scientific unknowns. Perhaps there will be new diseases that are discovered which we've been subject to for a long time and not realized, and then they become known, and then they turn out to be black swans that change everything. Things seem to be happening, this number two, things are happening very quickly in our world. Things that previously would take years or decades to emerge are just arising in a matter of months. Changes in the political environment, changes in the technological scene, changes in the way that companies organize themselves, changes on the stock exchange. These things all are happening very quickly and faster than they were before. And this gives rise to things that happen without us being able to predict them, because they're happening faster than our ability to track them. Or maybe on this other side down here, unbalanced information, number 10, where some people have some information about a situation, others have other information, and then when they talk together, that results in a complete misunderstanding because they aren't talking about the same thing, and results in decisions which can actually have unexpected and unintended consequences. Or unhelpful motivators, things which lead people to make decisions which are not useful because of the underlying drivers that they weren't aware of. And then the last one on this list is malicious behavior, people in our companies who commit fraud, or terrorists, or other state actors who have bad intentions. Well, we don't have time to go through all of these 12 factors here. If you're interested, then you can find this report easily on Google and download it as a PDF and read it. And it's free to read. What it's saying is that although black swans themselves are unpredictable, there are sources, there are causes of black swans that we can track, that we can monitor, that we can look at and see if they're changing, and try and predict whether those factors will give rise to things that could affect us in the future. So we should actually be more aware of these things. We should have some external, what should we say, trend monitoring device or trend monitoring capability, where we're looking into the future and seeing what might affect us. And we'll talk about what that might be in a couple of slides. We've tried to help people to think about things that they've never thought of before, to expect the unexpected, to imagine the things that have never been imagined before, and not just to be like this guy on the boat, just thinking that everything is fine because it's always been fine, and not realizing that maybe it won't be fine very soon. Okay, so that's how we might think about the global causes of black swans, to identify those 12 common causes, common factors, and to track those and to see if there are any changes. Now we can think about how we can look to the other side of the black swan. If a black swan actually happens, what do we do to handle the effects of the black swan on our project or our organization, or on our community, or on our nation? We're familiar with the idea of business continuity management, BCM, And the idea of business continuity management is for an organization to think about where it is vulnerable, where are its weak spots, where something could affect it quite seriously, and then to look around it to see if there are any things in the environment which are coming towards the organization which could hit one of those vulnerable areas. And then to look for early warning indicators or triggers that say that these things in the environment that could affect a vulnerable place in the organization, to show that they might be coming soon. And so what we're looking for is some kind of radar that scans the future, that says what is out there coming in our direction. And it might be that we can see some things are quite small and some things are quite big. And where we see a big thing, we might understand that it's something that could affect us. We might not be able to see exactly what it is because it's a long way away, but we can say it's a big thing and it's moving towards us and it's coming this fast. And then once we've seen something that's affecting us or that could affect us, we can change our position either to move out of the way of a big bad thing so that it won't hit us, or if it's a big good thing, we could move into the path of it so that we can intercept it and benefit from it. So where can we find something which is scanning the future and looking for things that are out there that might affect us and trying to determine how big they are and then trying to respond? We might call those three steps identification and analysis and response planning. And if we're looking for things that are uncertain that could affect us, we might call it risk identification and risk analysis and risk response planning. In fact, this radar is the risk management process. Risk management allows us to identify our key vulnerabilities, to spot when there are things that are coming in our direction, and to identify early warning indicators to tell us when these things are about to happen. So risk management is part of our answer for dealing with the effects of black swans. In terms of the typical risks that we face in our projects and programs, we use traditional risk management, which has a number of set response strategies. We have, for threats, the possibility to avoid a threat, make sure it can't happen, transfer a threat, get someone else to take it away, reduce a threat, make it smaller, or to accept a threat, to do nothing but have a contingency plan. And for opportunities, we have similar responses. We can exploit or capture an opportunity and turn it into a benefit. We can share it with someone else to help us make it happen. We can enhance the opportunity to make it more likely or better, or we could accept it, which means to do nothing with a contingency plan. And these responses work very well for our usual typical risks that we encounter in our normal risk management process. But what about emergent risks? Risks that we can't see coming, risks that we can't predict because they are unknowable. We can't use these standard risk response strategies. You can't avoid or transfer or reduce or exploit something that you can't see. When an emergent risk happens, when a black swan arrives, it arrives fully formed and it's too late to do anything about it. All we can do is protect ourselves from its effects. So the standard traditional risk management won't help us when it comes to dealing with black swans or emergent risks. What can we do to help us protect ourselves from the effects of emergent risks? We talked a little bit about business continuity management. I'd like to suggest that we could use something called project continuity management to protect our projects from the effects of black swans or emergent risks that might happen. Even if the black swan is unpredictable, if something happens that has a big effect on our project, we could be prepared to deal with the unexpected, to be ready for something which we can't see, which could have a big effect. How could we do that? There are two basic strategies in project continuity management. The first is flexibility. This picture of this man, it's actually one person. If you look carefully, you can track his arms and his legs, and he's bent round in a very strange shape. He is certainly very, very flexible. Or the chameleon here, which you might be more familiar with, which changes its color and adapts very easily and very quickly. We're looking to see if we can build into our projects flexibility so that if things change very quickly, if some black swan arrives, if some big emergent risk happens, then we can bend without breaking. It doesn't crash the project. We're able to adapt the way that we manage the project in order to continue. And we'll talk about how to do that in just a moment. The other key part of project continuity management, in addition to flexibility, is resilience. Resilience is the ability to keep going. So if we just look at this guy here, he's been running and he's just given up. He can't complete the course. What we really want is somebody who is able to run the marathon and then keep going, who is able to maintain their direction, maintain their focus, keep going, even when things go wrong and when they're challenged. So when some big unexpected event happens in our project, does it crush us? Does it stop us and the project can't continue? Or is it a resilient project which is able to bounce back? We have a very popular children's book in England called Mr. Bounce, which is a story of a little man that whatever happens to him, he just bounces back, and the children love to hear about Mr. Bounce. So we need to build resilience into our projects so that we can just keep going. Well, how can we have flexibility and resilience? Part of it is our mindset, the way that we view the project. Most people think that projects are like the picture on the left, where the track is our project management plan, the train is the project, and we put the train on the track and then we run the train along the track. So the project follows the plan. And we have a project schedule, which is like the timetable for the train. And so we leave the origin at a particular time. It takes us a certain distance, a certain time to travel the distance of the project. That's our project schedule. We have milestones in our project, which are like the stations along the way of the train journey. And we know how long it will take us to get to the next station, what time we arrive and when we leave, and then the time to the next station. So we have milestones in our project plan. We buy a ticket for the journey, and we can buy a ticket to the next station or a ticket for the whole destination. We know the cost of each part of our project and the cost of the total project. And then all you have to do is get your driver and your guard and your passengers and everybody else involved in the railway and run the train. Except it doesn't happen like that, does it? Projects are not just like trains that follow the track and they leave and they arrive on time. Something always happens on our projects which was unexpected, emergent risks. And so what we need to do, is to be ready to respond to them. So, for example, the picture on the right, I think this is much more like real projects. They're like boats on the sea, where we're trying to cross some bay to the other side, and the water is very choppy and the wind is very strong, and we have to keep our eye on the destination, but we get blown off track, and then something happens. Maybe there's a small boat comes in front of us, or maybe one of our sails breaks, or maybe somebody starts to feel sick on board, and we have to respond to those things, but keep our eye on the goal. And eventually, by changing direction as we go, we end up in the right place. And that's much more like real projects than the train on the track that just follows along. So how do we build flexibility and resilience into our projects to be more like a small boat that can respond to the winds and the waves? Well, I'd like to suggest 5 areas in our projects where we can be flexible and resilient. The first is the way that we structure our project. We really need to have clear objectives so we know where we're aiming. We need to have the right amount of money and resources in our risk budget and our contingency funds so that when things happen, we can cover the cost of unexpected risks. We need to have processes that we can change when things change. Maybe we don't have to have 5 people attending every single trial. Maybe some smaller trials we can have 2 people or 3 people. Maybe if we thought we might do a trial, repeat a test 3 times, we can sometimes manage to just do it twice. We can flex the processes depending on what's happening. And of course, the importance of change management, to understand the implications of change and make sure that we only make changes in a controlled way. If we have clear objectives, the right level of risk budget and contingency, flexible processes, and strong change management, our project will be able to cope better with changing circumstances. It will be flexible and it will be resilient and able to keep going. Not just the structure of the project, but the way that our people handle themselves, the way that our people are put together on our project teams. Good leadership is really important. When things change, we need to have somebody who keeps their eye on the goal, who can stay focused, who can motivate the rest of the team and help us to keep pulling together in the right direction. It's important that our team are empowered, so they don't depend on somebody else for approval all the time. They can get on with their tasks and do them under their own authority. The ability to be emotionally intelligent or emotionally literate, to understand why we feel certain things, why am I feeling anxious or why am I feeling angry or depressed, and then to be able to monitor our own internal environment so that we can get the job done even if we don't feel like it. And emotional literacy is also about understanding other people and helping them to cope with their internal environment. And having people with positive attitudes, so when things change in the project, as they will, they don't complain and moan and say, oh, this is going wrong and the project's bound to fail, but instead they say, what can we do to make it succeed? How can we make this work? Then we might have issues of technical resilience and technical flexibility. Perhaps we adopt an agile development methodology. Perhaps we have prototyping. Perhaps we have iterative development and partial releases. Maybe we build in design redundancy into our technical solutions. I guess most of us who are engineers will understand this area quite well. We can have a flexible and resilient contract where the terms and conditions, the T's and C's of the contract are not just fixed, but if something changes in the world, the contract is able to cope with it. We might have clauses in the contract that say, if this happens, we'll do this, but if this happens, we'll do that. And so it's clear that we can change the contract depending on the circumstances of the project. And clear accountabilities in the contract to say who is going to do what helps us to be very resilient when things change. And lastly, in terms of the wider business and the organization, it helps if our organization has a strong culture, has clear values, and engages the stakeholders in a very clear and strong way. Then we have an environment which surrounds the project, which is stable, which is able to support the project and help the project to be resilient when it needs to be. So I think there's a number of very practical things we can do in project terms to make sure that our project keeps going, even if the environment changes. And if we wanted one word to describe all of these things, it might be the word agility. Not agile development, but organizational agility. The ability to change direction quickly, the ability to respond to changes, the ability to keep going even when things around us become challenging. And that's what we need to develop in our projects, to be agile in our project environment, our project organization, so that when black swans emerge, we can cope with their effects. Well, I hope you found that useful. Here's a kind of summary picture. It says this: if we can't control the volatile tides of change, which we can't, we can learn to build better boats. And here's the example of Noah's Ark from the Bible, perhaps the best and strongest boat that was ever built, that never sank despite the 40 days of rain and floods, and survived and saved mankind and all of the animals as well. Perhaps we could learn to build more flexible and more resilient projects and organizations, so that even if we have strong tides of change around us, we still survive, and when things change again, we can come out of our boat and continue to survive and thrive. This is an important subject. Black swans are not just an interesting theory or an interesting idea. There are black swans out there which could affect your project, and they are coming in your direction. What you don't know will affect you. It might be very bad. So it is important that we understand what black swans are, where they come from, what they could do. It's important that we take steps to predict what might happen based on the causes and to protect ourselves from the potential effects of black swans. And the idea is that if we don't get them, they will get us. Well, I hope you found that interesting. When you're thinking about the black swans that you're targeting, this is what we want to happen. We want to kill them off so they can't affect us. So let me wish you a happy hunting of your black swans, and I hope that you'll be able to cope with all of the things that arise that affect your project, so that ultimately, whatever happens, your projects will be successful. So thank you very much for your attention. I'm very happy to take questions, and I think Majo has been perhaps monitoring or thinking about what the questions might be. If you want to contact me any further, here are my contact details. And I might just point out that on the website, we have about 100 of my articles translated into Spanish on the Risk Doctor briefing section of the writing part of the website. So if you want to read some of these things, and there are some papers about black swans as well, then you can read them in Spanish if that's easier for you than English. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'm going to hand back now to Maria Jose to take the questions.